June 1944, Normandy. The fields of France were burning, torn apart by shells and smoke, the sky choked with the ash of war. Rain mixed with blood, and the earth itself seemed to tremble under the weight of thousands of boots. Among them was Otto Weber, a 24-year-old infantryman of the German Wehrmacht, crouched low behind a shattered wall, clutching his Mauser Kar 98K with trembling hands. He had fought in countless battles before, in Russia, in Poland, in endless muddy fields where frostbitten fingers pulled the same bolts over and over again. But nothing felt like this. The Americans were different. They were coming through the hedgerows like ghosts, moving fast, yelling loud, never stopping. The air was alive with the sound of their rifles, a rhythm Otto had never heard before, a sound that made the ground feel smaller, the air feel tighter, and his courage feel weaker. The first one hit without warning, a sharp crack that split the morning fog. Then another. Then another. Otto ducked instinctively, mud splattering across his face. He pressed his rifle against his chest and shouted, "Feuer! Fire!" His squad rose, returned fire in bursts, but their shots were too few, too slow. The Americans weren't firing in single shots. They fired in a stream, a pulse, like the heart of a living machine. And then Otto heard it, the sound that would haunt him for the rest of the war. Ping. A short, metallic note that cut through the chaos. For a moment, he didn't understand. Then a new burst of gunfire erupted from the same position. They were reloading faster than any soldier should be able to. The sound wasn't the end of a fight, it was the beginning of another one. Otto pulled the bolt back, the metal clacking, chambered another round and fired. His shot hit a tree trunk where an American had been a second earlier. By the time he pulled the bolt again, that same American had already fired 3 more times. Otto could feel the panic rising in his chest. "They don't stop," Franz shouted next to him, his voice cracking. "They just keep coming." Otto wanted to tell him to hold the line, to be calm, to fight, but he couldn't, because deep down he felt the same thing. It wasn't just fear of dying, it was fear of being outmatched, fear of being faced something built better, faster, deadlier. The Kar 98K was a beautiful weapon, accurate, strong, built to last. It was the pride of the German army, but it demanded patience. One shot, bolt. One shot, bolt. It forced men to breathe between each kill. The Americans didn't have to. Their rifles were alive in their hands, semi-automatic, mechanical beasts that spat death with every pull of the trigger. Otto peeked over the wall again and saw one of them. A young soldier, maybe 20, face smeared with dirt, helmet tilted forward, eyes focused, Garand tucked tight against his shoulder. He fired 8 times in perfect rhythm, each shot echoing like thunder rolling across the field. When his clip emptied, Otto heard that ping again, so fast that by the time Otto had pulled his bolt, the American was already firing a fresh clip. Otto dropped back behind cover, breathing hard. The noise of battle was deafening now. Garands cracking, machine guns roaring, shells bursting in the distance. He looked at Franz. The boy was shaking. "It's just a rifle," Franz said. "It's just a rifle." Otto wanted to believe that, but he couldn't. This wasn't just a weapon. It was something else. Something that made the enemy fearless. They didn't wait for orders. They didn't hesitate. They pushed forward with a kind of confidence that no soldier should have in the middle of chaos. That confidence came from the rifle. Otto didn't know its name yet, but he could feel its power in the way it changed the tempo of battle, the way it erased the seconds between shots, the way it made men believe they could not lose. Another explosion hit nearby. Dirt and shrapnel rained over them. Otto's ears rang. Through the haze, he saw the Americans break through the hedgerow, advancing in perfect sync, one reloading, 2 covering, the others firing. Their rifles glowed in the smoke, steam rising off the barrels. Otto fired again and missed. He worked the bolt, fired again, hit one, but it didn't matter. There were more of them. Always more. Always shooting, always advancing. When his ammunition ran out, he pressed his back against the wall, clutching his rifle like it could still protect him. The battle was lost before it even began. Not because they were cowards, not because they were untrained, but because the enemy had a weapon that turned every soldier into a storm. Otto didn't know it yet, but that weapon had a name: the M1 Garand. And from that day forward, he would never forget the sound it made. The ping that meant the fight was far from over. He would hear it again and again through every village, every forest, every retreat. The sound that broke the silence. The sound that broke the war. The next morning, the fog lingered over the broken fields like a ghost, and Otto Weber's squad huddled behind the remains of a shattered farmhouse, staring at the horizon where the Americans were regrouping. Every man's face told the same story: exhaustion, disbelief, and a growing sense of dread. They had faced American soldiers before, but never like this. Never with rifles that fired as if the hands holding them were extensions of a machine rather than men. Sergeant Kruger slammed his fist on the wooden beam above his head, trying to gather courage. "We have to hold this line. For the fatherland!" he shouted. But the words felt hollow. The boys looked around at each other, eyes wide, knowing deep down that their rifles were simply not enough. The Kar 98K, once a symbol of precision, a masterstroke of engineering, now felt slow, cumbersome, almost obsolete. Every time Otto worked the bolt, he saw the Americans still firing, their rate unbroken, their rhythm unshakable. The M1 Garand was no ordinary rifle. It was a revolution. It was not just the speed, not just the semi-automatic action, it was the confidence it gave a soldier. With 8 rounds chambered, a man could unleash a deadly stream of fire without pausing, without thinking about operating the mechanism. For German soldiers trained to measure each shot, to pause and aim carefully, it was like facing a phantom that never tired, never faltered, never waited. Otto studied the rifle now, in his mind's eye, imagining it in the hands of each American advancing through the mist. He pictured the mechanism cycling, the clip ejecting with a sharp ping, the next round ready instantly. The sound had a rhythm, almost musical, but it was a death knell to him and his comrades. Every ping was another reminder that hesitation was fatal, that every second wasted meant another man falling to the ground, another position lost, another chance slipping through their fingers. And it wasn't just the firing. The Garand's presence changed the Americans themselves. Otto noticed how they moved. Forward, calm, disciplined, almost detached in the way they pressed the attack. They didn't crouch and wait like the Germans were trained to do. They advanced, confident that their rifles would protect them, confident that they could control the tempo of battle. That confidence, Otto realized, was contagious. Men who had never fired the weapon felt it in its power, in the way their brothers in arms trusted them to hold the line. It created an aura, an invisible force on the battlefield that made hesitation deadly.
By midday, Otto's squad was shattered, pushed back behind another ruined hedge, and whispers spread like wildfire. Whispers of fear, disbelief, and awe. "They have a rifle that never stops," one young soldier muttered, voice barely audible over the crackle of distant gunfire. "A rifle that keeps giving." Another added, shaking, 8 rounds, then instantly again. It's impossible to hit them before they fire again. Otto clenched his teeth, looking at his own Kar 98K, feeling the weight of every second it took to cycle the bolt. He had grown up on tales of German engineering, proud of his rifle, proud of the Mauser's accuracy, its long reach, its reliability. But nothing in those stories prepared him for this. Nothing could prepare a man for a gun that fired faster than the eye could track, that killed with relentless, unforgiving precision, that turned entire squads into moving storms of fire. The squad tried to respond, tried to adapt. They spread out, crouched, tried suppressive fire, aimed carefully at hedgerows and windows. But the Americans were already elsewhere. Otto noticed that every time one of their number fell, the American Garand would spit out a ping, and a new soldier would replace him, firing without pause, advancing without fear. It was as if the rifle itself dictated the rhythm of battle, shaping the movements of the men around it, forcing the Germans into a defensive dance they could never win. By evening, the lines had shifted, the Germans retreating to secondary positions, exhausted, shaken. Otto sat against the tree, mud coating his uniform, rifle resting on his knees. He could hear the ping again in his head, echoing across the fields like the beat of a relentless drum. He closed his eyes, trying to understand. The rifle was more than steel and wood. It was a psychological weapon, a fear forged in sound and action. A soldier facing the Garand didn't just risk death, he risked losing his mind under the constant pressure, the unyielding pace, the certainty that hesitation meant nothing. As night fell, Otto watched the Americans set up positions, their rifles resting calmly in their hands, their eyes scanning the darkness, ready for the next dawn. He realized something terrifying. The M1 Garand had not only changed the battle that day, it had changed the war itself. One rifle in the hands of disciplined soldiers could bend the pace of combat, dictate strategy, and impose fear without ever advancing en masse. It was the edge the Americans had been waiting for, and now Otto understood why German infantry feared it. It wasn't magic, it wasn't luck, it was engineering, discipline, and the quiet, unstoppable rhythm of a semi-automatic rifle that made every second of a firefight feel like an eternity. Otto lay down in the mud, staring at the stars, thinking about home, thinking about the rifle that would haunt his dreams forever, thinking about the war that suddenly felt bigger than any man, any squad, any plan. The M1 Garand wasn't just a weapon, it was a promise of fire, of speed, of survival, and for the enemy, a promise of fear. Dawn broke over the shattered countryside, a pale gray light revealing the devastation of yesterday's skirmishes. Otto Weber rose from the muddy trench, every muscle stiff, every joint protesting, and looked out over the battlefield. The aftermath was eerie, smoking ruins, broken fences, the occasional fallen tree, and here and there, a German soldier lying face down in the wet soil, rifles still clutched in lifeless hands. Otto's own squad had been whittled down, men scattered to different positions, and a heavy silence hung over the field. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion, it was the weight of fear that the M1 Garand had left behind. The stories were already circulating, whispered along the lines, shared in hushed tones among the surviving infantry. Every man who had faced an American armed with the Garand carried the same story, how the rifle seemed to anticipate their movements, how its fire was relentless, and how one moment you were aiming and the next someone beside you was gone. Hans, a young rifleman barely 20, described the sensation as being trapped in a nightmare where every heartbeat echoed in the barrel of a gun. The M1 Garand, in their eyes, was more than metal. It was a predator, a silent arbiter of life and death that demanded respect, demanded terror.
Otto remembered a particular moment from the previous day. He and a fellow soldier had taken cover behind a low stone wall, trying to pick off Americans advancing through the misty fields. He aimed his Kar 98K carefully, measured the distance, held his breath, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet whistled past, missing by inches, and before he could chamber the next round, a sharp ping cut through the fog. The Garand had fired again, a deadly echo, and the man next to him crumpled silently. Otto's hands shook, his chest heaving. He had aimed, he had tried, but the rifle's rhythm had beaten him, had dictated the outcome before he could act. That moment, he realized, was not unusual. Every encounter with the Americans was a constant reminder that the M1 Garand leveled the battlefield in a way the Kar 98K never could. Speed, volume, and consistency became an invisible force pressing upon them, guiding the tide of the fight. It wasn't just the rate of fire. The Garand's reliability was legendary. It would not jam, It would not fail at the crucial moment. A German soldier could fire carefully, hold his aim, but the American could fire continuously, adjusting, firing again without delay, creating a wall of bullets that shattered formations and morale alike. Entire squads learned to fear the ping of the clip ejecting, a sound that had become synonymous with sudden, unyielding death. Young soldiers who had grown up hearing tales of German precision and battlefield dominance now found themselves humbled, terrified, and utterly outmatched. Even the seasoned officers felt it. Lieutenant Kruger, a veteran of the Eastern Front, paced along the rear lines, muttering under his breath. He had faced countless weapons, had survived artillery barrages, machine gun nests, even tank assaults, but nothing had prepared him for the M1 Garand. He understood its tactical advantage. It allowed Americans to maintain a steady, suppressive fire while maneuvering, to pin down entire units with a single squad, to control the tempo of combat and bend the Germans into defensive positions they had no choice but to occupy. Every calculated move, every daring charge, every attempt to flank could be anticipated, countered, and nullified by the steady rhythm of that rifle. Otto, sitting against the cold earth that morning, reflected on the soldiers who had been forced to retreat. Some were broken, some numb, some filled with a rage they could not act on. The Garand had done more than kill. It had stolen confidence, shattered pride, and planted fear in the hearts of men who had once believed in the invincibility of their training and tactics. It was said that some German infantrymen would hesitate for a split second, just enough for a burst of Garand fire to end their advance. In battle reports, officers wrote of squads that refused to move forward, citing enemy weapons too effective and firepower impossible to overcome. Fear had become a weapon itself, and the M1 Garand was the wielder. By mid-morning, Otto's unit regrouped near the remnants of a barn, trying to salvage ammunition, clean rifles, and restore some semblance of order, but the terror lingered like a shadow. Even the soldiers who had survived previous encounters described a strange, creeping anxiety, a sense that no matter how carefully they aimed, no matter how quickly they fired, the Garand would always have one more round, always fire faster, always be the one to decide who lived and who fell. That night, Otto lay in a shallow trench, staring at the black sky, listening to the distant echoes of gunfire from the horizon. The rifle had changed more than tactics. It had changed them. It had made them question strategy, question courage, question survival itself. And as he drifted into a restless sleep, the ping of the M1 Garand echoed in his mind, a relentless rhythm, a haunting reminder that the war was no longer just fought with courage and discipline. It was fought against a weapon that had rewritten the rules entirely. By the time night fell over the shattered villages and rolling hills of Normandy, German commanders were already grappling with a reality they hadn't anticipated. Reports poured in from the front lines, detailing units pinned down by American squads, attacks blunted, and counterattacks failing in ways that defied their calculations. The M1 Garand wasn't just a weapon in the hands of soldiers. It was a psychological lever, a force multiplier that rendered traditional infantry tactics unreliable. Colonel Becker, stationed in a makeshift command post near Caen, sat hunched over maps and dispatches, cigarette smoke curling around his furrowed brow, the glow of a lantern flickering across his grim expression.
He read report after report describing skirmishes where German infantrymen attempted to advance across open fields, only to be met with bursts of semi-automatic fire that tore through cover and shattered formations. Each encounter with the Americans wielding Garands seemed to amplify losses disproportionately. Where previously a single machine gun nest or a well-coordinated artillery barrage might have stifled an attack, now even small squads of riflemen could hold entire sectors with frightening efficiency. Becker's aides whispered of a weapon that could shoot like a machine gun but carried like a man, the M1 Garand, and the phrase seemed to haunt the corridors of command as though the rifle itself had become a looming presence. German tactics, honed over years of disciplined warfare, now required constant adaptation. Flanking maneuvers that had once succeeded with predictable precision were failing.
Soldiers were hesitating, unsure whether to cross open terrain, uncertain if the firestorm they faced would stop long enough for them to reach cover. Becker realized that the Garand didn't just change firepower, it changed behavior. His men, trained to act with decisive speed, now hesitated, second-guessed their movements, and sometimes froze under the weight of an invisible threat. Reports detailed panicked retreats where entire squads abandoned positions simply because they had encountered Garand fire, a phenomenon that commanders could not easily explain to superiors. Even the German propaganda that had once bolstered morale began to falter. Soldiers returning from the front whispered of the American rifle that never sleeps, of how one man with an M1 could hold a trench against an entire assault, and how its rhythm, its accuracy, and its speed created a sense of inevitability in battle. Unit leaders tried to instill confidence, reminding troops of discipline, positioning, and strategy, but the stories of Garand-inflicted casualties spread faster than any official orders. Fear became contagious. It was no longer only the physical wounds that concerned Becker and his officers. It was the erosion of morale, the creeping anxiety that spread like wildfire, leaving even veteran soldiers hesitant, uncertain, and prone to mistakes. To counter the threat, German commanders experimented with new tactics. Squads were ordered to advance in tighter formations, yet tighter formations made them easier targets for the semi-automatic fire. Flanking units were instructed to move at night or under cover, but the Americans adapted quickly, laying down suppressive fire and employing spotters to anticipate movement. Becker convened council meetings, poring over maps and battlefield reports, but every solution seemed temporary, every maneuver a partial answer at best. The Garand had not just disrupted the front lines, it had disrupted the command structure, forcing leaders to overthink every decision, to second-guess every order, and to constantly anticipate an unpredictable variable that could not be neutralized easily. The psychological impact extended even further. Soldiers carrying older rifles like the Kar 98K began to develop what frontline officers called the Garand anxiety, a persistent gnawing worry that no matter how skilled or brave they were, the American with the M1 would always have a faster, more reliable response. It wasn't just a threat to life, it was a threat to confidence, cohesion, and the very identity of the soldier. Becker observed that men who might have previously charged through a hail of bullets now froze, exchanged nervous glances, and waited for orders that might never come. Units fractured, hesitation spread, and in some cases, entire platoons failed to accomplish objectives simply because the relentless rhythm of the M1 dictated a tempo they could not match. Even high-ranking officers acknowledged the weapon's disruptive power. Memo after memo highlighted the problem. American squads with Garands are holding ground that should have fallen under German tactics, the semi-automatic rate of fire has shifted the dynamics of small unit combat, and the fear instilled by the weapon was as lethal as the bullets it fired. Becker knew that the war had changed in the hands of men with M1s, and he understood that overcoming it required more than courage, it demanded a revolution in strategy, timing, and mindset. Yet, on the muddy fields under the gray Normandy sky, with the sound of distant gunfire echoing, he also realized the limits of German adaptation. The M1 Garand had already rewritten the rules, and every delay, every hesitation, every split-second miscalculation now carried deadly consequences. Dawn broke over the hedgerows of Normandy, the mist clinging to the fields like a shroud, and the German infantrymen prepared for another day of combat that already smelled of mud, fear, and uncertainty. Unteroffizier Klaus Reinhard adjusted his helmet, fingers trembling as he checked the bolt of his Kar 98K. He had faced American soldiers before, but today he knew the M1 Garand would decide the fate of whoever survived these fields. The rumors had spread faster than the artillery barrages. A single American rifleman could unleash a storm of fire that outmatched entire German squads. And now, Klaus was about to see it firsthand.
The attack began like countless others. The order to advance, the crunch of boots on wet earth, the whistle of distant artillery. Yet within moments, the narrative of the day shifted entirely. Across the field, flashes of gunfire erupted in rapid succession, precise, deliberate, yet unrelenting. The sound was almost hypnotic, a staccato rhythm that cut through the morning haze. Bullets thudded into dirt, splintered wood, and the occasional armor plate. Each strike a silent message. This was no ordinary rifle. Klaus dove behind a fallen tree trunk, his heart hammering. He counted the intervals, the cadence of the fire, and realized with dawning horror that a single soldier could unleash a volume of fire that he and his men could not match. Nearby, Gefreiter Otto Lang crouched behind a hedge, peering at the advancing Americans through his scope. He had trained to aim carefully, to breathe, and to fire with precision. The Kar 98K rewarded patience, discipline, and timing. But the Garand demanded none of that from the enemy. Every shot seemed to find its mark without hesitation. Every burst a controlled torrent of lead that broke ranks before they could close in. Otto whispered under his breath, a prayer he didn't fully believe, and adjusted his sights, trying to anticipate a weapon that didn't follow the old rules. He realized, almost with resignation, that he was now dancing to someone else's rhythm. By midday, the field had transformed into a surreal tableau of chaos and fear. German squads, once confident in their training and tactics, now moved like shadows, wary of every movement, anticipating every flash. Each encounter with the M1 Garand forced instant adaptation. Move, take cover, fire, retreat, repeat. Otto watched as a young private, barely 19, was pinned down, unable to fire. Each Garand round that cut through the air a reminder of vulnerability. The rifle had become more than a tool. It had become a predator, its cadence dictating the tempo of battle and shaping the psychology of those who faced it. Sergeant Heinrich Vogel, a veteran of countless skirmishes, understood the M1's power on a level that transcended mere mechanics. It wasn't just the semi-automatic rate of fire or the 8-round clip. It was the consistency, the reliability, and the psychological pressure. German soldiers knew the intervals between shots were too short, the accuracy too precise, and the damage too immediate. Under that pressure, hesitation became lethal. Hesitation became fear. Every man with a Garand was a ticking metronome of death, enforcing a rhythm that the German infantry could not disrupt. During one brutal engagement near a shattered farmhouse, Klaus, Otto, and Heinrich found themselves isolated, separated from their platoon by smoke, mud, and the relentless torrent of Garand fire. The Americans advanced methodically, covering each other, firing, repositioning, never missing, their rifles producing a deadly symphony. Klaus tried to suppress fire, Otto attempted to flank, Heinrich shouted orders, but each action was countered before it could fully materialize. It was like fighting a ghost that always knew the next move. They realized that bravery alone could no longer secure survival. Understanding the M1, predicting its user, and sheer improvisation were now their only hope. By the end of the day, German losses had mounted, and the field lay scarred with craters, debris, and the echoes of fear. Survivors huddled behind ruins, sharing whispers about the weapon that had torn through their confidence as efficiently as it had torn through their ranks. "The American rifle that never sleeps," someone murmured, and the phrase resonated like a curse. It wasn't just a rifle, it was a revolution in how infantry combat was experienced. It demanded respect, evoked terror, and changed the battlefield forever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the battered fields of Europe, the story of the M1 Garand began to crystallize in the minds of those who had faced it. For the German infantry, the rifle was no longer merely a piece of equipment to be cataloged and feared. It had become a symbol of a new kind of warfare, one where firepower, speed, and psychological pressure reshaped every encounter, every maneuver, every heartbeat of combat. Veterans like Klaus Reinhardt, Otto Lang, and Heinrich Vogel carried more than physical scars. They carried memories of a weapon that had demanded constant vigilance, a rifle that forced them to question not only their tactics, but their assumptions about what a single soldier could achieve.
In the quiet hours after battle,
As the men trudged back to makeshift shelters or huddled in the ruins of bombed-out villages, stories of the Garand circulated like a shared legend. One soldier described the shock of watching a lone American infantryman advance while maintaining a continuous semi-automatic hail of bullets, each round precise and deliberate. Another spoke of the exhaustion that came not only from physical exertion, but from the constant tension, the knowledge that hesitation could be fatal. And everywhere, the same realization grew stronger. The M1 Garand was not merely a tool of war, it was a psychological weapon, rewriting the rules of engagement and redefining the very nature of fear on the battlefield. Field commanders on both sides began to adjust. German officers devised new strategies to mitigate the Garand's advantages: coordinated flanking maneuvers, increased use of cover, suppressive fire to force the Americans to pause, and tactical withdrawals to avoid unnecessary losses. But for the soldiers on the ground, these were stopgap measures at best. The M1 demanded respect, and its users, often young men barely older than the teenagers they faced, wielded it with discipline and deadly efficiency. Each engagement left German infantrymen wary, cautious, and in some cases, permanently altered in how they approached combat. Beyond the immediate battlefield, the M1 Garand's influence stretched into the larger narrative of the war. Campaigns in Italy, France, and the Pacific revealed the strategic edge afforded by semi-automatic rifles. Soldiers could lay down sustained fire, suppress enemy positions, and maintain offensive momentum without waiting for cumbersome bolt-action reloads. Commanders began to appreciate not only the weapon's mechanical superiority, but its ability to shape morale, instill confidence in American troops, and sow apprehension in the enemy. In letters and diaries, German soldiers wrote of the rifle with a mixture of respect, fear, and grudging admiration. They marveled at the precision, the speed, the way it seemed to operate almost as an extension of the soldier's will, translating thought into action with terrifying efficiency. For the American soldiers, the Garand was more than a rifle. It was a symbol of ingenuity and preparedness, a manifestation of industrial power meeting battlefield necessity. Each weapon produced, each clip loaded, each soldier trained to wield it effectively contributed not just to tactical victories, but to a broader psychological dominance. The rifle created opportunities, shifted momentum, and allowed relatively inexperienced troops to hold their ground against numerically superior or better positioned forces. Its semi-automatic capability meant that American squads could deliver continuous, concentrated fire, suppress enemy advances, and reshape engagements in real time, often turning what might have been a chaotic skirmish into a controlled, decisive action. As the war drew towards its final chapters, the stories of the Garand became part of the collective memory of those who had survived. German infantrymen, even in defeat, spoke of it with the reverence usually reserved for legendary warriors. It was not a weapon to be cursed lightly. It was a force that demanded acknowledgement. And for the Americans, the Garand was a proof of a philosophy of war, that technological innovation, combined with rigorous training and strategic foresight, could tip the scales in ways both tangible and intangible. It changed lives, reshaped battles, and in countless small, decisive moments, altered the trajectory of the war itself. By the time the smoke cleared and the continent began the slow process of recovery, the M1 Garand had earned its place in history. It was remembered not only as the rifle that changed tactics, but as the rifle that changed perceptions, instilling fear in the enemy, confidence in its users, and respect across the battlefield. Soldiers who had once feared its name now carried memories of the rhythm of its fire, the relentless cadence that defined so many crucial moments, and the quiet understanding that war was not just about numbers or strategy, but about the tools and minds that wielded them. The M1 Garand had done more than fire bullets. It had fired the imagination, reshaped the psychology of war, and left an indelible mark on history.